Well, what I'll do, basically, I'll speak anyway. So I do like visuals because I do forget quite a lot. Basically, Venessa Bob, before 2022, because I got married in 2022. So I'm now Venessa Bobb-Swaby. I'm a mother of 3 young adults now, between the ages of 18 and 23. A grandmother as well. So in the presentation, if it gets shown, so how it all came about was Nathaniel, who now is 21, was diagnosed autistic ADHD in April. And what happened at that time was, because I worked in television, nobody would have seen the challenges I was experiencing with my son. But because of routine, I think obviously he was with certain family members, they would not see it as it was behaviours. They saw it more as it was my parenting skills. Because I worked in television, long hours, it's that thing of attachment disorder. And I think when you're working within, I suppose, certain communities, and I think with me as a black mother, I used to tell everybody, I just called Nathaniel, who's here, he's turned up, and I used to call him the black version of Dennis the Menace. Because no matter where I went, he was the child that people didn't want him to be at a birthday party. They didn't want him to be anywhere because they said he would spoil the party. So what I started to do is I started to isolate myself, because I felt that no matter where I was in the church community at the time when I was married, my husband at the time, friends, family, you name it, nobody believed me. But my journey, as I said, started working in television. So my background is that my journey will be very different to another black autistic person or a black person, because I say it very openly, and I don't say in a way to say I'm belittling our community. It was that thing of the isolation, the loneliness, that, be told that I shouldn't accept autism because it wasn't a black disease. It was only in the white community. Then when being in the black community, the challenges I experienced was the isolation, was the multi-layers of, when I tried to say, for instance, Nathaniel, my son, is autistic, they would say there's nothing wrong with him. It's your parenting skills. So even though I gave up working in TV, and I'll say it now because I've left many years ago, it was ITV, so I was a technical technician. So even though I worked in this lovely lifestyle and I was married, but home I was hurting. Because in my journey was my background, and I always say to everybody is, when I was always told I overshare, I would speak very openly. So when Nathaniel at the time I can say it now, is where the biting, the slapping, you name it, the flapping, the biting, the self-harming, people used to say to me, it was like he copied because I put him in a residential autistic school. But one thing I struggled with was that I still felt isolated within certain communities, because I always just say to everybody, when I'm in the white communities, they understood what autism was, but then when it was the cultural perspective changed. I always say to everybody that when you walk in a room, you see the colour of my skin. If my son was running down the road and they told me to call the police, this was the social services, when he was acting up, and I said, no, at the time he was acting up. But as time went on, I realised he was having meltdowns. He didn't want me to go to shopping. He used to struggle going into certain spaces when the music was loud in JD Sports. But all I was always told is call the police. But then in the end, with me, because obviously you got this challenges within the community with, the police and the black community, is I work with the police, because I always say to everybody, when there's trouble, who are you going to call? Not Ghostbusters. You're going to call the police. So I had to end up finding a space where I had to remove myself from certain people in certain communities and work in isolation, because my voice always seemed to be gagged, because I was told I can't say that. But over the years, and I said, A Second Voice celebrates 12 years this year, May just gone. And through that journey, I met people from all across walks of life, in the community. They live on the south, it could be in Wales, it could be in Broadstate, wherever it is. You found families that were coming saying, nobody's listening to us. And even though I'm part of, lots of organisations, I still feel that, I always say to everybody that I feel I've been always culturally gagged, because I don't want to be a tokenistic person who's saying, look, I'm speaking for the black community. I'm only speaking for myself. I'm only speaking for my lived experiences. Because when my son was being violent, people didn't see the autism. They just saw a very angry young black boy, and he was naughty, and nobody else listened to the fact that I was hurting, because I went through domestic violence. I went through sexual abuse. But when you disclose these things to certain people that come in your house, And these are black professionals coming in my house. So any black parents out there, professionals, is we have to keep it real. Autism affects everybody the same. You know, it doesn't matter where you come from. But I know that when I'm in black spaces, I couldn't even speak about autism because all they saw was a naughty black child. I always explain to people that when I started working with families across the community, this is how I used to explain it in the early days. So how I used to explain it in the early days was, you know, like, okay. I may have to shift it across to something. So how I explained it is, you know, like how in the early days when I first started my presentation, it would be sort of like, you know, you got classes. So, you know, you've got in the white community, and I had families that would come to me, and they always seem to describe the council estate young white boys, ABSBO, antisocial behaviour. When it came to the black youth, it was gangs. So I used to keep on saying, this is why I started talking about why in certain words is language can be different. So now I can do my presentation because I was waffling on because I had nothing to look at. So basically, as I said, who I am. So that would tell you basically, if you press the next slide. So basically, it just tells you the history of who I am, where as much as I've got all these different hats, and no matter how much, you know, being, you know, public speaker, doing work for the Autism Association, the National Autism, all the stuff that you see here, that's just part of who I am. But behind that, I still feel very isolated in the sense where I always say to everybody, I don't want to be the token voice to speak for everybody, because at the end of the day, my journey has been where I've met with communities across the communities. And when somebody comes to me and says, oh, well, I get that, I go through that. But when I go into a room, you see the colour of my skin first. There's a lot of white mothers that I've met, especially in COVID, who reason why how this all came about was that in COVID, a lot of mothers were coming to me, or even fathers out of London, and saying, we can't speak race in our communities because nobody knows I've married outside my race. So I always say to everybody, we have to remember that just because somebody may be white in your room, you don't know if they're married outside their race. And it was that word as well, when somebody says, I'm autistic, and you are somebody, we heard earlier, is about if you can't disclose that you're autistic and you're working with people in your communities or you're working with your families who are talking so negative about autism, they could be doctors, they could be social workers. I had families that worked close with me that worked in education, social services, but they weren't interested in autism. They just felt that I was accepting the label. But for me, I just wanted my son to be in a space that he was accepted and he was happy. And that's where I mean, I've got to leave this. So just do the next slide, please. So basically, I was just saying to anybody, if anybody says, you know, we are a BAME organisation, I don't look like that word BAME. I'm not a BAME mum, I'm a black mum. I'm not a SEND mum, I'm an autistic mother, because people need to realise that, and I'm not being dissing anybody, is when somebody says to me, Venessa, we're looking for somebody who is in the neurodiversity community, who's SEND and BAME, my conversation is, do you want them to be autistic? Do you want them to be black? Do you want them to be Asian? Do you want them... People need to sometimes say what you mean, because for me, sometimes with funding seems to take everybody, and then when somebody comes to me in the community, somebody has got a language barrier that I can't help them, where do I find them? So I try to make sure that I connect with other communities to make sure that those voices can be heard. And I think that's where you look at a lot of the work that I've done is about connecting different communities together. So I say that there's some people are gatekeepers where they don't want people to come into their spaces because they don't know what to do. For me, I'm about working together because I can't speak, and I'm being very honest, there's some communities that don't want to talk about LGBT. But there's people that have come to me over the early days when they couldn't tell their parents. So what I've always say is I have to stay in my lane, but I still have to make sure I connect with people that can help these families. Because I always say to the people is that if you turn around and tell somebody they can't be something, and what you find will happen, they'll end up in the mental institute by default because they don't know who to talk to. So even that is uncomfortable some conversations are, I'm there for anybody. As long as you've got autism, I'm there to help. But I have to make sure I know who I'm signposting people to, because I don't like people wasting my time. And I feel, and I did say earlier to Dan, I think that when it comes, is it Dan? It's Dan, just remembered. Dean earlier is, when I met him years ago, in COVID actually, is that I wasn't diagnosed autistic at the time, but people used to always say to me, are you autistic? I said, no. But they said, how do you know all this information? It's what went back over the early days when I was younger, and I remember the things that happened to me. So I was able to speak about my daughters. But when it came to my son, I struggled. My son at the times when he used to have, I say his moment, erections, and I'll say it openly because we have to be honest. He used to say, you haven't got one of those. So I had to find somebody that could talk to him. And this is the problem sometimes if we are single mothers, we have to understand sometimes we have to find somebody that can speak for our young people because we can't speak for everybody. So that's how I had to meeting up with other specialists within the autistic community who helped me. And then that way, that's how I end up becoming the voice for the voiceless. Yeah, next slide. So as I said, this is just a case study. So I'm not going to really ask you to read. Basically, what I'm just saying is, this is a family that came to me years ago. So basically, it was a Somali family. The child was diagnosed autistic, but the father struggled to accept the diagnosis. So if you are an organisation and you have somebody that comes to you, how would you help that family? For me, I didn't have the language, but I had to find somebody. But there's some organisations, because of this funding thing, we don't want to work with nobody. This is where the problem comes. So what I try to do is, because I can't see at the back, because I usually have it in front of me, but it's okay. What I do, let me come this way to make sure that I could get it all right. As I said, I'm very visual and I do forget. Yeah, so basically, I've got this one. So basically, with this father, the father spoke very little English. So what people need to understand is, say, like for me, I disclosed that I went through domestic violence and sexual abuse. Now you imagine that there's a child sometimes that will be translating sensitive information for their parents. Now, if the person is going through domestic violence or sexual abuse, how are they going to able to speak when those families, that person who's the perpetrator, that is next to that family? So sometimes in certain communities, they can't speak, especially if women are I forgot what the word is. So if the man is the breadwinner and the mother stays at home and there's language barriers, who is connecting and who's speaking for these families? So that's the reason why I always say to everybody, I can't speak for anybody. It's just to show you there's different things that you could go into a meeting, and if you don't have those words, what autism means, because in the Somali community years ago, way back in 2008, I think when my son was diagnosed, you found that that word did not mean anything. Autism was a different word. But now in time, things have got better, but I still feel that we're still way behind when it comes to within the communities. Next slide, please. Yeah. So unseen challenges, prejudice assumptions. So if the family was my first child, I don't think I would have had another child because, as I said, he was a nightmare. I'm going to be honest, because sometimes we pretty up autism in the sense to say, oh, my child is perfect. But once you go home and then the child, like with Nathaniel at the time, and he's older, and, I had to ask permission because in the early days, I would never show his pictures on social media. I always block it out and do, change it because it's about their identity. Because if they can't speak for themselves, we have to be so careful that when they're out in the community, our young people may get targeted. I know because I worked in television. So people need to keep it real, is that if you've got your child out there on social media, now I can do it because they're older. They don't really look like that. But as I said, it was a nightmare. He was a lovely child in the middle at 2 months. But the problems that I had was nobody believed in me that he was autistic because he was such a quiet, pleasant child. But as he got older, things started to get worse. And no, and this is in the black community, it wasn't MMR. Because everywhere I went, it was always blaming MMR. I said, okay, I've got a friend who's never had MMR, but the child is still autistic. What are you going to say about that? They couldn't answer the questions. So sometimes I'd say to people, it's not my battle. I'm about solutions, not about the problem that you're trying to push on me. Next slide, please. I won't play the film. There's a video on there, but I can send you the link. So basically on the link, Nathaniel at the time of 2011 is just after I went through 4 tribunal appeals, and they didn't believe me. What Nathaniel used to do, he used to pluck out his eyelashes, pull out his toenails. I got videos, but nobody believed me. He actually bit his thing. He used to bite off himself, and he told me that he was going to tell the school. Now, if I wasn't a camera woman or the person who was filming this at the time, I probably would have been put on Section 47 because nobody believed. This is what saved me. And in my son's school files, you would never see anything that was put because as far as they were concerned, it was at my word against the professionals. But because I used to anybody who knows me, I take lots of pictures. There's a reason behind it. Take documentation, have email threads, because sometimes professionals get it wrong, but at least you've got something to go back to. I trusted my family, but my family were my worst enemies. As much as these family members, I do talk to them now, but just imagine you got your family members reporting you to NSPCC. This is all in the documentation. So it's not I'm lying, but it's through me being strong. When my son was there biting, and he was, oh yeah, you can hear him there. And he was slapping up his sister, he was biting the little one. They were explaining, the older one now is 20, he said, I want my brother to be normal. The little one, he used to bite her up. But people say, oh, it's sibling rivalry. What do you know what sibling rivalry when you're in an autistic household? Violence is very different when there's stimulation. So we talk about the masking, we talk about the sensory processing. I never knew none of that. I had to do it the fact that I just knew my son didn't like to be in noisy spaces. I knew that he didn't like to be around lots of people. But people told me that I made him that way because I put him in a residential school. But what I found when he went to the residential school in Broadstairs was it made him grow. It made him realise, he said, Mum, I'm not like, no disrespect, Mum, but I'm not like these other autistic people. So I was having to fight for the autistic people without a learning disability because they keep on thinking that we're bunches all together. And then, but with my son, he proved to everybody that everybody can come together because he developed his own skills. He said, Mum, I don't want to be on medication no more. I had to listen to him, not what the professional said. And that's what I learned being with my son. Next slide, I'm going to rush this. Thank you. So what I've done is I'm just giving you a sort of like indifferences, prejudice and assumptions. So delay in diagnosis, I'm just going to give you a nice, you can see all this, on all the groups that are there. So with me, when I look at how I end up getting a delayed diagnosis was people even telling me they thought I was mentally ill. So in my files, I was always mentally ill, or my anxiety because of what happened to me as a child, in the childhood trauma was, it was exacerbated because of my childhood, my anxiety, my mental health. My son's behaviour was because of the domestic violence. It wasn't. My son just did not feel comfortable with certain people. So if certain people were in the house he did not like, he would kick off. But I can understand. So it just shows that he's got the voice now and he speaks about it. And it's certain people he just doesn't like even now. And he says it's not because, even though I say sometimes you've got to forgive and forget, he says, no, I can't. It's because of what these people did to him over the years to him. We got to look at the fact that I'm going to jump, accessing services. I don't really access services really, because even though I'm asthmatic, I had eczema, you name it, I struggled to go to the GP. And I didn't realise it was because I just didn't like to be in those places. So my teeth could be falling out. I will not go in. COVID, I had one little spot, it escalated into a big rash. But I found what it was is that if you got people who don't know how to talk to you, I ain't going back. But people will say, oh, that's nothing to do with autism. But as I got to understand who I am, it was because of my autism. So that's why my story is very different to somebody else who is an autistic black person, because their journey would be different, where they would say everything is because of racism. Mine wasn't about racism. I felt I didn't fit in the black community and I didn't fit in the white community. I just did me. That is how I felt. Again, as you can see all the different things that are on there, which I've spoken about quickly. So again, it says, for those of you who are tired of hearing about racism, imagine how much more tired we are constantly experiencing it. So for me, as I said to everybody, I only really understood what racism was, I suppose, in COVID, when somebody said to my daughter, when we came somewhere in Ballyman, he said, go back where you come from, an old man. And I turned around and said, Mum, why did he say that? I said, oh, don't worry about it. So sometimes for me, I could have probably seen racism in my face, just like when I was being sexually abused. I didn't know what was going on, because if it looks normal to me, I accepted it. I had to educate myself from television. I had to educate myself being in spaces when I'm doing work with the National Autism. So the Autism, Anna Freud National Autism Training Program, where that's why I started hearing about the differences of what other black autistic people are facing. I've not experienced some of those because it's just how I am. Next slide, please. Just another one, cultural differences, inequalities and discrepancies. Again, you find a lot of black people, black autistic people, brown, Asian, dual heritage have told me the challenges they've experienced. Again, for me, dietary requirements, we all know that if we don't want our food to be touched. But sometimes certain communities, we eat with our hands. So we eat fish and chips with our hands, chips. But imagine you've got a family, an Asian family, and they're used to eating curry and roti with their hands, chapati, but they're cutting it with a knife and fork. People are going to laugh. I've seen people laugh at, families, and I say, it may be sensory, they just don't want to touch it. Or a mother with a child with a hijab. I don't want to wear it. Oh, the child's being westernized, not realizing it's the texture, the material of the hijab. But people don't understand this. So that's why I always say to everybody, when you're with families that come into a group, unpick what the challenges to that individual person is. Again, talking loud. Again, in the book I was in, I wrote and said, people within the African and the Jamaican community always told they talk loud. When I went to Italy and I went to Ireland, when I went with one of my family members, they talked loud and I started laughing. Sometimes you got to close your eyes and realise you see the colour of our skin first, but you don't realise most people do all talk loud most of the time, especially football. You hear everybody now cheering now because they're happy. So I do hope, I'm sorry to say, I hope England do win. I'll say it now. Culture sensitive needs, again, representations are key. You know, your materials, your books, does it show who you are? If somebody doesn't see a reflection of themselves, they're not going to read that information. That's why you notice a lot of my literature is very animated. I make sure I put pictures, I put everything so everybody can understand. Next slide, please. I just rush because I don't have no time. Concerns raised by parent carers. So cultural needs and wants are met. So obviously over the years, what came back, what we would talk about. So you look at the stimming, the humming, the screaming, the rocking, repetitions. I do a lot of rocking. I've been told I need to stop it. But again, now, as we say, don't feel ashamed. Once I got the diagnosis, I don't wave it with my hand. If I want to rock, nobody can tell me nothing. I just ignore them. I don't care. But I know my children say, Mum, stop rocking, stop rocking. But I do it because it makes me feel better. Bruises to dark skin. What people don't realise is that, as I said, I had one little spot. And if you see how it's gone really terrible on my skin, because the doctor at the time didn't see it. Pain for me as well is a problem where even my children, my daughter, you see the picture at the bottom? My daughter broke her toe and in 3 places on a big toe. And at the time when she was in year 6, teachers, everybody said she was lying. She got a strong threshold. Remember, she took 10 years before my daughter got diagnosed. So it's, again, sometimes when it comes to our skin, the darker we are, you're not going to see out the colour of us, you know, the bruises. Even if somebody breaks the arm, regardless if you're autistic, the strong threshold. But when it comes to, I think, the Black community, we've been told that we're very strong. But sometimes you've got to take away those myths and investigate to make sure that when we're saying I'm in pain, look, Magnolian spots, my son had that and I was scared because I thought people thought I was going to abuse, you know, I was abusing him because, you know, if anybody's got these little blue marks, if they got colour into the skin, it looks like bruises, but it wasn't. Oh, really? Oh my gosh. Okay, I can slow down. Okay, so another one you can see in the picture is where the top one is where somebody's got stung by an insect. You see the difference with the colour of the skin? It's just like a spot. Then on the white skin, you see the rings. Now imagine if somebody goes to the GP, and I've had that incident with my children. Like my daughter, when she got bitten on the other video, which you're not going to see, she got bitten. And as far as they were concerned, they couldn't see it. But if you look closely, she had a ring mark on her face. So these are how things I think some of the social services, I think, do miss out when they're working with people within the Black community or Asian community or anybody who's got dark skin. Another one is the self-harming is overlooked. Parents can be accused of abusing their children. Again, this happens across any community because I've had families who have come to me in social services. And again, this is what really upsets me is where your child is self-harming. So my daughter used to cut and she did it in a school. This is in COVID. I remembered when I tried to challenge them. They said, oh, no, it wasn't done in our watch. I said it was. So I had to take the picture of her arm when she was sleeping to take it to the team around the child for them to realise. And then in the end, what it was, she just didn't like the school. So she was keeping all that feeling in. She doesn't really want to talk about her autism because she feels that in her head, somebody told her the other day, occupation therapist told her, you're not autistic. I think you've got attachment disorder. That is something she had in her files when she was in primary, secondary school. And for me, it's like the label, social, emotional, mental health. These are the sort of things that I seem to see in my children's files, or any file, especially for a lot of the Black children. They use the SEMH, and parents don't realise that's not a diagnosis. So this is how sometimes we get late diagnosed. And I think that's how as a child, I was very tearful. I was crying. I was needy. I look back at my files, and anything I spoke about, it was all based on the fact that I was missing my dad. At the time, my mother no longer was with my dad. And nobody was listening to me. Even, as a mother, when I was complaining about my son's behaviour, it was always based on my parenting skills. So if somebody's saying to you, you're mentally ill, why aren't you helping that parent, regardless if they're black or white? Because everybody doesn't realize we get tired, we don't sleep. And if we are undiagnosed, we're like a tiger, is it like a bull? You've lied about our child, we're coming after you. That is how I was. You're lying. Why are you lying? I've read what you've written. I've been at the table looking at the people. So that's why I always say that there's lack of qualified interpreters specialising in autism and other related conditions. So if they don't understand what autism is, why are you there advocating for that child or that family? Because you're just going to add your own biased views. So if I don't look autistic, because someone told my son that last week, you don't look autistic. And my response was, put it in a writing, because in time, if that goes against you, you've got it as an email thread. I always advise, put everything in emails because it's so important. Divide between many local SEND and autism groups speaking on race and SEND. Who is speaking for who and how to make those changes? Again, I speak from my own lived experiences, but somebody else will come along and say, oh no, it's because I'm black or it's because I'm Asian. But then you have to unpick it and say, who's been helping you? Because some people say, we're still behind. But you Google autism in that word BAME or black, you see there's more out there, but there's still a lot of gatekeepers who are not bringing us all together. So today I'm quite happy because it's the first of many groups I've come to where you see a diverse group. Usually when I used to go, I was the only black person, and probably my one of my key workers or my son may come along just about, and my daughter. Next, please. Another late diagnosis case study too. So this woman was 35-year-old black woman, has been diagnosed as autistic and ADHD and not sure what she needs to do. She had been a troubled teenager and was known to CAMS. She doesn't feel comfortable telling her family and friends, but they think she is mentally unstable. The GP has referred her to A2ndVoice CIC support. Now, this person now, obviously I can say, she's out in the community. She met me, it was in COVID where I got funding, and at the time, you have these little bubbles, and I remembered it was meant to be targeting the Haringey community, is it Haringey community, in regards to the African community. I don't sometimes like to do these groups because sometimes I feel, again, I can't speak for all the communities because there's so much different dialects. But I got this one phone call and it said, hi, how can I help you? How can I help you? Is it your daughter? She said, it's me. So I said, come. By the time this young person came and spoke to me, what it was is that they were very intelligent. They had it all going. But because they were told they were mentally ill, they were sectioned. These are the stories that we hear. But because she was sectioned as a black woman and because of the way she was presenting herself, they didn't see autism. They saw an angry black woman. When they were touching her, she obviously got more hysterical. When she started rocking, obviously they think she's gone a bit loopy. So it's these sort of things we've got to be so careful. But this person, as I said, they're doing remarkably well. A lot of the black autistic people I've met over the years, they're doing lots of great things. But if I had that support in 2008, when I Googled autism, I don't think I would have been who I am now because everything was based in America. And in America, it was is it a refrigerator white mum? The only mother, they only talked about the middle class, but when it came to black people, they didn't class them as autism. They use these words, obviously retarded, which we don't like to hear. We still hear those words, believe it or not. Handicap, retarded, we still hear those words. So we do need to keep on educating. And when you do hear somebody in the black and Asian community, you have to just realise, hang on a minute, they're not in your spaces. So if they're not in your spaces, where are they getting the information from? Because a lot of them are getting it off social media, or they're staying in their little groups, but the people going in them spaces, not in the spaces that I go. If I'm speaking with the National Society, or I'm speaking with even Sarah J. Cretchley, she was one of my go-to people. As much as she's a white autistic consultant, she helped quite a lot of the black mothers in COVID, because I didn't know who to go to at the time, but I've met quite a lot now. So it just shows they are out there, but it's just to make sure they're not there just to take the ka-ching. They're doing it because they want to make a change. Next slide. So again, as I said, being aware of who is the gatekeeper. So I know we talk about unconscious bias views. Again, I've always said to everybody from my experiences that my children used to say that when a black professional comes in the house, I hope they're not going to be like the last person. So they lost trust in professionals, because if you don't understand autism, as I said, you're just going to cause more problems when you're writing the wrong information in the report. And a lot of the things in my report is still incorrect. I can't change that. That's why I called it a second voice, because obviously I got diagnosed now. I can be in those spaces and say, that's not right. And I would never do it before the diagnosis, because the way I look at it is, well, what right have you got to speak for us? So now I know I can say comfortably, because I've got the evidence of my files when I was a child, how I was misdiagnosed, overlooked, and told that I was a problem. I used to get bullied. My needs were never met because nobody understood what I was going through, because I was this, as people used to say, I was a coconut. I was black on the outside, white on the inside, because the way I grew up, my family had a business, so nobody saw me crying on the inside. But I stood up to the bullies as I got older. And the reason why I did it is because I can do it now and stand here now. I wouldn't have done this 10, 20 years ago because I was scared. I kept thinking, well, no one's going to listen to me, but I've seen the change over the years. Again, you got historic trauma. If somebody obviously in the black community is not going to trust somebody, because if you know that, over you look at the history over the years, is where's that information going to go to? If you go into certain spaces and you just keep on getting research, what do you do with that information? So some people are not going to share information. I would say it very openly, because I know that I want to know that in years to come that my children's children don't go through what I went through, and that's for anybody. So again, another study, again, a 15-year-old diagnosed with sickle cell. Again, this happened to me, but this person was older. And I remember this was in COVID, I went to ice skating. This young child had sickle cell and autism. But the challenges is the young person is that when they had a nosebleed, and I said to them, have you had it before? No. But what I'm going to do is read, this is a different case study to show that if the parent is not disclosing that the child has got autism or sickle cell, or they're not telling the child they're autistic, how can they verbalize themselves? Because you've got a lot of children in mainstream schools who some parents are not told their children they're autistic. So if they do get caught up in the criminal justice system, if they do get stopped somewhere because they're following a friend, you remember, if you're a white child and a white child who gets stopped by the police, more chances they may be let off to an extent compared to the black child. But then I do work with the police, and I have met families, again, out of London, their young white boys have been stopped by the police. Again, I thought sickle cell was only a black condition. No, it's not. I've been told that other communities can get it, the Mediterraneans. So again, it's about educating. So I've got to say to everybody, you've got to make sure that if you are a professional, you're a doctor, a nurse, because we get doctors, who are still saying this autism doesn't mean nothing. This is what they tell us behind closed doors. So we have to make sure that if there's a hospital passport, our data, your child's got information in their bag, that they've got the notes in their bag. If they have got sickle cell, if they've got sickle, or they've got, there's many other conditions that are out there. I know there's one in the Asian community, which is on my other slide. Is it chronic kidney disease? If you look at the symptoms, you look at the traits, the itching, there's a lot of, again, it's on my other presentation, you're going to see there's lots of conditions that could look like something else. But if you're autistic, you're not able to, like with my daughter getting pins and needles, it took until she was like 11, 12 to realise that she was having vitamin D deficiency. She had epilepsy later on, but knowing that it was because of her epilepsy why we found out that it was because of the epilepsy we found that she was vitamin D deficiency. But all through her primary school year, she had absent seizures. Nobody picked up on it. Just thought she was just being lazy. She wasn't remembering. So it's these things we have to understand about absent seizures, on diagnosis. And if somebody is in the black community, we just have to be a bit more understanding and not think that again, that word of hypochondria. I was told I was a hypochondria. I wasn't. It was because I knew there was something that was wrong. That's it. I'm going to rush this one. So again, what is cultural restraints? Because I'm part of the National Autism Training Programme, trainer, funded by NHS. One of the things that I did pick up on, and this is what I got when I was doing, anybody who knows Alexis Quinn, the Restraints Reduction Network, I was asked to do a talk, and at the time this was one of the new ones. What is cultural restraints? So basically, cultural restraint, when I did a research way back, people said they thought it was to do with colour. And I found it quite amazing. When you were in the early days, you heard about culture, people assume black, Asian. But what this meant is cultural restraint is using cultural norms to make a person do something they don't want to do, or stop them from doing something they do want to do. So making someone feel ashamed, inferior, and or humiliated because they're different to someone else. Stopping someone doing something that is important to them, their values, ethnicity, or culture. So again, somebody, for instance, you've got a Muslim who wants to go out, if they're impatient and they want to pray, and you take their rights. So they say, no, you can't do it. Somebody may say, I don't want to eat pork, but you're still going to give it to, it's about you're taking their rights away. Another one is stopping the person from expressing their cultural views. Again, I went through a lot of this as a child, but I didn't know what it was. And there's a lot of illegal restraints that are going on. And there are 8 others, but I don't think I'll put it on this one, because I'm just trying to show to everybody in certain communities is that I just feel that I'm like a needle in a haystack where I speak, but I still sometimes feel like is it imposter syndrome, where I don't think I should be in places because I don't feel some of my voice is not being heard, but I know. So when I get a phone call from Devon, or I get somebody from America say, we read you in the book, thank you, because no one talks about sexual abuse and domestic violence or certain things in the community. So I know that my voice is being heard. Another one. Examples of cultural restraints is like a Rastafarian asks to cut off their dreadlocks for a job, demand autistic person to give eye contact. I went through that for years. I learned, but again, feeling uncomfortable. And what I always try to do is when I'm in places, I don't want to keep it, because when we go to places, you've got to be honest, we always hear the same things to the point, it's not I don't want to hear, but it's some people say our voices in the Black and Asian communities, a dual heritage, we're still not being heard. We're there, but we're not being heard. Another one is the dietary preference, not giving them suitable food options. Another was not allowing someone their prayer mat to pray. Another one is not adjusting communication with people with a learning disability. Interpreter not translating what has been requested. So again, they're saying one thing, and if they don't understand, they're going to give them something totally different. When I spoke, I think early in the year, it was about, you always hear about co-production. I decided to put SEND co-production and cultural restraints. So SEND co-production is paid staff working together with people with expert by lived experiences. This can be very challenging from a cultural perspective. We know that people say it can be hard to involve people from ethnicity majority groups. That's a lie, because today at 1-to-1 Enfield prove that's a lie, because you can see there's a diverse. Yeah? We know people from the ethnic minority groups can feel excluded. They stay within their comfort zone. I agree. Again, when you used to use the word BAME, I could be in an area, you see probably the Polish in one community, you see the Turkish in another community, the Nigerians in another community. Me, I didn't know where to stand because my parents were not African and they were not Jamaican, so I didn't know where to stand. My family are Guyanese, Aruban, so that's why I think I just was just different. I didn't fit in with nobody. Couldn't understand when they talk. I used to just shake my head. You got to remember, sometimes we used to be in places and just shaking your head. I didn't know what they were saying. I couldn't understand. But now I just say, look, I don't understand. I need an interpreter. Another one says, next slide, please. So co-production can perpetuate cultural restraints. Co-production can result in people experiencing microaggressions. This is slights, hurts, or insults. It's so good to have someone of colour here. This can be offensive. Again, I've heard this for years, but it doesn't bother me because I was always the only Black person. But it does offend other people. So is it that word? If somebody is autistic, more chance to say, don't say that. And I think that's where I used to get myself in trouble quite a lot in the early days. This being the only Black person in the room, tokenism, sometimes I would turn down certain jobs because I think it's just a tokenist, just tick the box. Then I don't hear from them again. If they ask me, I say, no, I'm not interested. Feeling dominant by white culture and voices. We've heard today, somebody came and said to me today that the panel were all white, and I started laughing. I was just saying that you got to remember, a lot of Black and Asian people, be honest, they don't want to talk their business. We turn up to area dirtily in public. So if they don't want to speak, who's going to do it? You're going to get the nearest person. And sometimes it's not they're getting it wrong. It's, I know what I know because I've been in spaces. So like I've met Nanny Auti. I met her in Glasgow, Edinburgh, and we sat on the same stage. And I've always kept in contact. So it's that thing of people don't realise we don't have to be in the same spaces. It's just about being online. And when we do meet, it's nice because we understanding. It's like we've not seen for years, but we come together. I have Black and Asian friends. I'm not racist. When you say that, I always say, why bother say it? Just don't say it. Because at the end of the day, it means that probably there's something going on while you're trying to defend yourself, but just don't say it. It's better just to say, hi, and that's it, than to say, oh, you're all right, but the others are... I heard these over the years, and I understand now why it didn't affect me, because it's where I grew up in my family household, because we're very diverse in my family. Another one, how can we be trauma-informed when we co-produce? It's being trauma-informed means thinking about people's histories and how trauma might impact them when you co-produce. If someone feels marginalised because of their race and experience in inpatient units, it might be hard for them to be asked their views on a project when everything has already been decided on. This could re-traumatise them because they might feel marginalised again. So it's something that was picked up when I was doing one of the training with at Autism. So my top tips to overcome cultural restraints in co-production. Understanding the importance of cultural restraint and restrictive practices. Again, that's another slide on another presentation. Being aware of the children, young people with trauma experience of triggers, what has been difficult for them in the past. This will help avoid re-traumatizing them. Is their assessment reports up to date? Hospital passes. So again, if a young boy, a black boy, has been stopped by the police, they don't even know they're autistic, they're undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, or if they're a child in care, child in need, but they don't have no one to go to, or even a lot of the community groups, black community groups, how are they delivering the programs for those who are autistic? You can't, the words I keep hearing, we put the label at the door. How can you put the label at the door if you don't understand what autism is? Because I'm glad the lights are off. I went somewhere where the lights were bright yesterday and I said, the bright lights, and my son was with me. They turned the lights off. They made that reasonable adjustment. Some people say, no, we need the lights on, but they don't realise just that little adjustment, it shows that you're listening to what we've got to say. Up-to-date and relevant materials, resources and information, evidence-based. Where are you getting your information from? That's for anybody that is working within the black community. You can't just come with your own lived experience. We have to bring different evidence together. It is out there, but some people feel that there's somebody's blocking the information to get to the right people. Having difficult conversations, create a safe space where those who live it can talk openly with the right persons to facilitate. Listen and don't downsize one's lived experience. You know, when you get somebody who says, like for instance, my leg is aching, and they may have a joint pain, but it may be because of that some people got is it foul? I can't use it, foul. I never say the word foul. The one where they got joints. That's it. So if you've got somebody who's autistic, and I know they are, and they say it, and then somebody comes along and says, but my body aches as well. Why are you downsizing? It's not about you. It's about us. It's about what we're going through. And that's the problem with certain people. Like, as my son said the other day, when someone said, you don't look autistic, I got angry and said, you need to pull it down, because that could go against you in years. Because if they're telling you that now, what is they going to be thinking when they're trying to give you a service? You've got to make sure your voice is heard. If your voice is not heard, as you get older, like me in my 50 plus, it gets very tiring. My brain's always like this all the time, everywhere I go. And I know my son thinks I get on his nerves. I want to protect him of what I went through over the years. Don't work in isolation. Learn to share, signpost, and not be scared to say, I don't understand. I always tell professionals, if you don't understand, just say, I don't understand, because you're wasting our time and you're going to cause more trauma on the trauma of what we've experienced. But as a black person, as I said, I always say, I still don't feel I fit in nowhere, because my brain knows, being in the white community, what I've experienced. And when I'm in the black community, I get it, but they're not on the same voice of me because of the spaces that I've been, anybody that knows me. Be transparent, honest, and willing to unlearn and relearn or retrain and understand what autism is and what it's not, and listen to the person that you're working with. Put a clean slate and make sure you hear. If they're being aggressive and argumentative, maybe there's a reason, but don't just assume it's because they're an angry black person, because that has been put in about me. I've got a chip on my shoulder. It's not. I just didn't like injustice. Again, I just say to everybody, poor SEND co-production. We know what SEND production will lead to: multi-layers of failures, unmet needs, frustration, and constant disappointments. The young person will miss out on their fundamental knowledge and skills, which impacts their learning, self-esteem, and providing them with the best chance for their career path. Again, you see all this, ignoring the EHC plan, no EHC plan, excluding culture, ethnicity, lack of interpreters in autism, insufficient resources and intervention, no follow-ups, no support, lack of special provision input, reasonable adjustments denied, inconsistencies in note-taking and sharing of information. I went through all of that with my children, and I'm still standing, but I'm still tired because I don't like to sleep. For my husband, the one I'm married the 2 years, I don't know how he puts up with me, because I'm really hard to manage. And when he said to my son he wanted to marry me, I was like, wow, are you sure? But I can see when you've got someone who loves you, who understands you and accepts you for who you are as an autistic person, whether you're getting a diagnosis or pending or you think you are, once you feel comfortable with that person, you can be who you are. And that's why I think I've blossomed over the last 2 years, because I feel I know what the word love means now than I did before, because I had to hide who I was. I had to people please. Now I can say no comfortably, because I've got my support work and I've got my husband behind me supporting me. It does make a difference. So again, why SEND co-producing, co-delivering children, young people and families? So you need to be transparent, honest, willing to learn. Again, I've repeated a lot of this. It includes autistic people and their families. It's so important, Connect with Black and Brown voluntary groups and self-help groups. Let parents and carers know what is available, even out of your local borough. I don't stay in my borough. I like to move around, or I like to know if I'm doing something in this area, I like to know I can signpost. So like once I know I got contacted by B, I found it, didn't have no date or whatever, but I still shared it so that there's somebody in the area that would know what's happening in Enfield and surrounding area. You find lots of groups don't share. They just keep it to themselves. They're doing a lot of damage because we can't speak for everybody. Find an advocate that can assist families. A difficult parent may seem aggressive and loud, but maybe it's their way to express themselves or their culture. Learn to share. Again, I've said that already. Making reasonable adjustments by providing cultural resources, Widget, Makaton. So with Widget, I've connected with them all through COVID, and then they obviously changed some, skin tones. And I do a lot of my materials. I use a lot when I do a lot of my play activities with the families. Another one was check to see if you're being biased and send co-production in your organisation or in your groups, or tell your family it's not just one person's job. And that's basically, in a nutshell, last slide, is to show to everybody, that's to me what send co-production means, is where you bring everybody together. And even look, Dean is there somewhere. Yeah, I just felt it's so important that when people say people can't come together, I disagree, because I know what I've done over the years. It has been hard, 12 years of the Second Voice. But what it's done for me, it's made me realise when I've heard the different stories from different communities, different cultures, beliefs, traditions, you name it, it's all in my head. But I know I've got pictures that could tell 1,000 stories of how autism has impacted the individuals across the UK, even national and abroad. So that's in a nutshell who A Second Voice is. Thank you.